This is the event planning workshop. So I'm going to be presenting it with Tyson. We're both from the SDGA, which is the SDG hub at the University of Calgary. We're really excited to kind of share some of our learnings from planning a bunch of events. We're going to walk you through an event planning 101 real quick, a couple of the steps there. Then we'll talk about what it means to organize a sustainable event. And then finally, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions. This is like a quick walkthrough of the event planning 101. We'll be talking about kind of creating a vision, putting it all together, and then finally looking to the future. So I'll turn it over to Tyson now to start us off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, the first one, event planning 101, creating a vision. So this is typically like our first step. Creating our vision is all about laying the groundwork for the event. It's planning your big picture, setting the goals that you want to accomplish and identifying your capacity in terms of who wants to be involved, how much funding or resources you have to work with. So capacity is super important, something that we'll talk about in a couple of slides. So doing all this big picture planning is crucial at the start of the event planning process because it helps you identify kind of what you want to do and then what you can and cannot do based on this capacity that you've identified. It's also really important to create a shared vision, language, and goals and values with your team and helping guide your decision making later on. So you can always go back to that core vision that you created with them together. When you're picking speakers, creating posters, maybe promoting your event, you can always tie that back to the original vision. You can ask yourselves, does this align with the purpose and goals that we set out at the beginning? Of course, this document or these ideas can be fluid, but it's good to have some sort of idea in the beginning. So we wanted to move to the next purpose slide. So yeah, this purpose, defining the purpose of your event is probably one of the second most important planning pieces, can really help set you up for success. It involves creating a vision for your event that will help guide the subsequent activities, speakers, and programming that you put into the event. So this is like an actionable item. You should probably write out a purpose statement, 1 to 3 sentences that answers these questions. What do you want your impact to be? And what do you want people to take away? So for big events, it can be helpful to get into the small details. So in addition to creating a purpose statement, you can identify the specific, more measurable goals of the event, such as like strengthening student collaboration on the SDGs on my campus, or even go as far as creating learning outcomes. Say after this event, students will be able to, etc. I think that one's really important, especially if you're trying to receive institutional support. Tying in the learning outcomes back to it is kind of a proof that it's having some impact on the students. And then next, consider having a theme for your event. This helps you structure your planning and your attendees' experience. You could focus on an SDG or just like an overall concept. For the SDGA in the past, we've themed events, like our last summit theme was intersectionality in the SDGs, and ones previous have been like local is global. This upcoming summit that we're having in October is all about communicating the SDGs. So then if we're looking at being like relevant and innovative, just think to yourself, like, can I present a topic or a concept in a new way? What's relevant? Like, what are people getting excited about talking about right now? And then what has and hasn't been done on your campus? I guess if you're looking at what the university is doing, if you're a student club that's kind of tied to the university, but not fully, you can definitely, I don't want to say like get away with, but you can kind of like get away with doing like a bit more like innovative events or ones that kind of push the boundaries of like social constructs as well. So it's really important to be innovative to get that engagement from the students and the greater community. And then the last one, it can also be useful to set specific goals and metrics for the number of people you want to reach. For us, that's definitely important with funding. We kind of have to, we put out a plan every year that the Office of Sustainability holds us to. So if we want to say, we want to engage, 500 students at different events throughout the year, it's really important to keep that tracking for every event so that you're able to prove your impact later on. Awesome, so that's good for that one. Moving into capacity. So there's 2 things to think about here. Capacity in regards to people or capacity in regards to funding. So it's important to recognize your capacity, not only so you can set goals for your event, but also so you know your different limitations and boundaries. So people can be like, what does your capacity look like as a team? So how many people do you have on your secretariat? You can set up your team so that everyone is aware of their individual roles, but also collective responsibilities. So of course, teams will look different in every setting, every institution, but there are some rule of thumbs that we followed that has led to success. So there's kind of make sure that there's a clear leader or leaders who takes on the role of chairing the meetings. We've always ran with co-chairs, whether it's a smaller subcommittee or the greater alliance as a whole. I think the two people who have kind of equal responsibility of leading really keeps each other accountable. So that might not work for everyone, but it's definitely worked for us in the past. Next, we can do like create clear expectations for everyone, including what tasks people are responsible for and like specific tasks as well. Of course, these are fluid as the event planning moves along, but you can always go back to, communications and marketing will take care of that. But if you want to help out in some other capacity, for sure do so. And then I guess just having that open conversation about playing to people's strengths and their interests. So as a co-chair leader, I wouldn't say to kind of just assign the teams, like have that conversation at the beginning and see what gets people excited. And then you can kind of apply them to the teams in that aspect. And then another aspect of your team capacity is in partnerships and collaboration. So if this is done well, it can bring a lot of benefit to events, whether that's additional funding, new contacts, promotion, materials, or support with planning. For sure, you want to make sure that each partner is aware of their responsibilities, and some possible partnerships that you could form are with. We've had some community organizations. There are quite a few other like student sustainability groups on campus. So we like to collaborate with them and host events together. And of course, your staff or sustainability offices on campus if you have one. So for the last one, for funding, this one's pretty straightforward, but it's kind of how are you going to fund your event? For sure, create a budget at the outset, considering costs for venue, speakers, catering, marketing, and other supplies. In terms of obtaining these funds, we recommend maybe looking towards opportunities that you can apply for. There's lots of grants for SDG related activities or partnerships with your faculty or admin on campus. Kind of a last resort for us in the past has been ticket sales, but that is something that you can do as well, kind of charging like a small fee for access to the event. But we try and shy away from that because if we do have other funding options, we just want to keep our events as accessible as possible.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to move us into the next section now, just being conscious of time. I know we don't have a ton left, but this next section is putting it all together. So this is kind of the real bulk of your event planning here. It's all the big and small details. We split it up into 3 big buckets. So we have logistics, programming, and promotion. Programming is kind of like that center of your event, your speakers, your activities, your fundraiser, whatever you're doing. Logistics is like those efforts that support your event. So it's like booking your venue, finding catering, doing things like that. And then promotion is, of course, how you get the word out. It can seem really overwhelming at this point just because there's so many kind of moving pieces involved in event planning. We recommend using like an organizational tool like a Gantt chart, which you can use to create a timeline of planning tasks, or you can use like a production schedule, which is really useful to like map out your event day, like what's going to happen, who's going to do it, what needs to be set up in kind of like a chart form. And that's really helpful from a planning perspective. Moving on, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about logistics, and let me know if I'm ever talking too fast or anything like that too. The first step here is just picking your date and venue. For date, just be very conscious of your target audience. So if you're working with students, make sure you're not doing something during exam time. Evenings and weekends tend to work better. At the SDGA, we also like to check an interfaith calendar to make sure that we're not having an event on like a major holiday or religious observance. In terms of venue, again, think about accessibility here. Is it close to public transit? Are there ramps and elevators? Are there gender neutral bathrooms? Things like that. You can use things like AV and like setup and catering to create like a really welcoming and comfortable space for your attendees. So make sure to always think about that as well. And then a couple other pieces are things like recruiting volunteers to help out on the day of, because it's usually a pretty big task. And then also things like photographers and videographers so that you can record kind of everything that you accomplished. It's hard to kind of give specific tips on logistics, but I guess my biggest piece of advice here is just to think about all the small details, small things like, you know, providing water for your speakers, having direction signs in your venue, or even like making slide templates that are consistent across all the presentations. These things are like really small, and honestly, they might not even be noticed by your participants, but they can really make a big difference in creating a really professional and well-run event. In terms of programming, this is kind of the bulk of what's actually happening in your event. So your agenda, this could be like a speaker, workshop, panel, whatever you want. In terms of tips, I always suggest that you include kind of opportunities for people to really interact and engage. I'm sure we've all been in events where like people are kind of like falling asleep or yawning just because it's so long. So it's really great to kind of build in time for people to move around, to get to know one another. We always like to find ways for the participants to also share their own insights and knowledge, whether that's through discussion, whether that's through a Q&A, and to also create opportunities for collaboration so that they could be working together to solve a problem, to co-create a paper or some like kind of action items together, anything like that. And then if you are looking for kind of speakers to present at your event, make sure that you kind of vet them first to make sure that they're the right fit. So that could include just doing some background research, or even doing like a phone call so you can get to know them and help create that presentation together. I think one of the mistakes we've made in the past is kind of finding someone who's like a really big name, but then they speak at your event and like they don't really have the right message, or they're not really reflecting what you want the event to be. So that's like a really important thing to think about. Final piece here is promotion. So this is not only how you promote your event, but how you brand it. Branding includes things like colors, logos, tone, and language. Make sure that's consistent across the board and also reflects kind of the vision that we talked about at the beginning and the values of your event. Be really organized here. Communications is actually like a lot of work. So I would put like 2 to 3 people at least on this. Make sure you have a timeline, make sure everyone has specific responsibilities, like who's doing Facebook, who's doing Instagram, who's making the graphics. And depending on your target audience, you can use different platforms. So social media for us has been a good way to engage students and youth, but you might want to use email if you're looking to contact more faculty or staff for specific classes. And finally, just be really creative here. This is kind of like your, I don't know, just get fun here.
I guess looking to the future. So congrats, like your event is done. It's a lot of work to plan a big event, especially if you're engaging a lot of students. So take a couple of days off to rest and relax, but post-event, it's important to take some time to reflect on some of the successes that you've had, but also areas of improvement for your event. So this process is essential as you continue your work as a student leader in the SDGs, because it helps you kind of understand what you did well, what needs to be changed for next time, and helps you monitor how your work is influencing the greater vision. So, I mean, if you're hosting an event one year, you're hoping that year after year, your event will just get better and better. So this mindful reflection is really important in that piece. So evaluation is also an amazing learning opportunity. So by like allowing yourself to critically reflect and inquire, it creates an opportunity for you to improve and adapt your work. So this will be kind of in like a mindful reflection, but also in like a formal like data collection, so that we can move to the next slide for that one. So this is monitoring and evaluation. So this piece comes in key when we're, like I said before, like when we receive institutional funding. Having like pre and post surveys is really important to see the impact that we're having on the students, whether it's based on knowledge on the SDGs or advocacy initiatives that we might want to head in the next year. So yeah, monitoring and evaluation can look like many different forms and also occur at different scales. So it can range from like a short debrief with your team post-event, or like a comprehensive evaluation strategy that includes these pre and post surveys and feedback. So some of the tools that the SDGA has used in the past to help us monitor and evaluate has been like a detailed debrief meeting with the team. So we have a kind of a meeting, you know, a couple of days, a couple of weeks after the event, and really, like, that's the only thing we'll talk about the meeting, is really diving into an honest and authentic conversation about what went well during the event, and what areas were challenging or need to be improved next time. If you have a big planning committee, ideally all of them would be at the event, and whether this might be like a casual conversation with some of the participants. It's really interesting to just, walk around the event, see how everyone is feeling, and then share that in the debrief meeting with the team. Another one is administer surveys during and or after the event. So the surveys during the event kind of have that added benefit of people putting on the spot to answer the survey. So that's increasing your response rate. But of course, it needs to be pretty short or easier to fill out. Kind of like we have like a few iPads that we're walking around at our events and just saying, hey, can you fill out this quick survey? It's typically just like rankings or ratings, not any like text input. So, like 30 seconds or less, pretty quick, just to get that like touch point feedback. And then surveys after the event can be more comprehensive and ask for those like longer text questions. Yeah, and then looking at compiling your reflections and evaluations in some sort of report can be as short as like a one-pager or be multiple pages. You can include photos and charts and quotes where possible. The quotes, kind of that storytelling piece Katherine had mentioned, which is really interesting, especially to have that like less qualitative impact from the surveys. And then, yeah, when reporting your evaluation data, whether that's in statistics or quotes, always make sure to anonymize it and ask for permission from the respondents to use it, because it's for our knowledge, but definitely the impact reports will be sent kind of like up the ladder to our office and the greater like institutional sustainability strategy at our university. So we just want to make sure that they're okay with that data being used by higher powers, I guess. And definitely when you're in those debrief meetings, try not to be like too hard on yourself or overly critical, because it is a lot of work to plan one of the events, and you do need to take some time to kind of like celebrate your accomplishments as a team together.
Awesome. So our kind of last section here, I think we have about 5 minutes left, is about organizing a sustainable event and what that means. Yeah, so these are kind of a lot of tips we have for sustainability. Sustainability looks at a lot of things. It's not just about the environmental impact of your event, but it's also about kind of managing your resources responsibly, ensuring your event is relevant and impactful, and also creating an invitive and inclusive social space. So now I can just summarize kind of, we divided this into 5 different sections. So we have, first of all, venue. So the big thing here is just accessibility. So I talked a little bit about this before, but things like, is it close to transit? Ideally you want something on the first floor, but otherwise if there's like elevators or ramps for people with limited mobility, using sustainable materials to decorate your event. From a communication standpoint, always try to reduce kind of the number of printed materials like brochures or programs that you're handing out. During your event, encourage people to kind of walk, take public transit or carpool to get there. And instead of ordering like a single-use banner, try to get a reusable one that you can reuse year to year. For food and drink, so here, depending on kind of like your budget and those restrictions there, try to support locally sourced, organic, and fair trade foods. When possible, it's always good to kind of have like a vegan or vegetarian menu, or using like kind of like more humane meat sources. Always be really kind of aware of dietary restrictions and allergies. And we made a mistake kind of in previous years. We didn't really use our RSVP data to estimate the amount of food, and we ordered way too much. Like we had almost double, which was awful. And thank God, like we could donate it to an organization, but it was still a lot of money that was wasted. So in terms of waste diversion, so this is things like avoiding single-use items like bottled water or styrofoam, providing reusable or compostable dishware instead of like paper plates, and using only mixed recycling or compost bins at your venue if possible. It's also helpful, like on our campus, we have kind of signage on like the trash and recycling bins that tells you what goes where. And so if your campus doesn't have that, you can also make something like a poster for your event so people know where to kind of throw their trash and recycling. And then from more of a planning standpoint, just ensure that your team is kind of on board and familiar with all these sustainable event guidelines. You can talk about sustainability at your event and all the things that you did to help make it more sustainable. It's also important to kind of follow all the cultural protocols. So if you're inviting an Indigenous elder and doing a smudge, for example, making sure that you're following protocols in terms of like, you know, like providing tobacco, making sure that you can like have smoke in the space, things like that. And making sure that you're doing a really meaningful land acknowledgement as well. And then the final piece here is just doing your best. I'm sure as you guys are all here at the workshop for the SDGs, I'm sure your events are helping to generate new knowledge on sustainability, but that's another important part there as well.
I guess like one thing to add on the last slide, just with the planning part of a sustainable event, I think these things, especially with your planning team, but also the potential participants, they kind of need to be like communicated right at the outset. So if you, especially if you are in a venue that where you won't be providing like water for all the participants, like water bottles, we always say in our events, like make sure you bring your reusable water bottle. Just be aware that like no outside food is typically brought in, because at a lot of our events, like we only have compost bins. So we let everyone know about that right at the beginning, so they wouldn't bring in something that could potentially contaminate that compost bin if they did just throw it in there thinking that it's garbage. So yeah, just making sure to communicate that right away. Another note to that is just talking with catering as well. So some of the catering packages, I think communicating with catering right at the beginning is important as well, because I mean, we provided breakfast and lunch at one of our summits, and breakfast, I guess the yogurt option was in like single-use plastic cups. So we just, for them to prepare for us to have a zero waste event, we had to communicate like we just wanted like one glass container of yogurt that people can serve themselves. I'm not sure how that will work in like a post-COVID convention world, but yeah, if they had to do like different ordering ahead of time, it might expand your catering requests.